Hey friends, it's Simon Hurley and welcome to another video. Today I'm here on the Gel Press YouTube channel. I'm so excited to be joining their design team as I've had lots of fun in the past using the Gel Press and I can't wait to share it with you guys a ton of different techniques. Today I'm using the Gel Press plate to make a bunch of different backgrounds and really share some of my favorite techniques to use the gel plate to create some different cards and really how I use it in card making. So without further ado, let's get into it. Alright, so here are the three different sizes of the gel press plates that I like to use. I like to use these smaller versions for my card making, and this rectangle and circle that are smaller fit really well on the card as kind of like a different block of color. And then this larger rectangle I like to use to cover the full front of a card. So I like to peel off just one side of the plastic of my gel plate, and then I leave the plastic on the back side so that I can move it around my desk and pick it up without it getting messy or moving around. So that's one good tip that I like to do when I'm making my cards. So for this first background, I'm just going to add down a little bit of red Dina Wakley media paint, and then I'm going to take my brayer and start brayering it out. Now you want to do kind of a thin layer of paint, and you get used to it as you start going on. At first it was very hard for me to kind of figure out how much paint to add, but you want just enough paint, but not too much, so you can kind of like see through to your desk on the other side. Then I'm going to take a piece of my Simon Hurley Create Stark White cardstock and add a little pressure all the way around to get my paint transferred on. This is just going to be a solid layer of paint on my cardstock. And then I'm going to clean this off. As a card maker, I like to keep all of my supplies clean, so all my stamps, stencils, and gel presses are extremely clean. So now I'm going to add a little bit of black paint on top. And again, just a really thin layer, especially for this layer, because I'm going to take my stamp and lift off. So you want a really thin layer to be able to lift it up and go down to the clear plate. So once I'm done brayering out this layer of paint, I'm going to take my classic flannel background stamp from Simon Hurley Create, and I love putting these rubber stamps on to create a little bit of texture. So here I'm going to apply a little bit of pressure down onto my background stamp and kind of wiggle it around a little bit to lift up that paint. You'll see there the paint transferred onto the background stamp, and then I can place down my red background that I've already done onto my gel plate with the paint on. This way I can get that gray and black layer on top of the red that we already had because of the paint that we lifted off with the background stamp. So that's a really cool way to get kind of a reverse of what the background stamp is. Now for the second background, I want to create a little bit of kind of a sunset using some winter colors. So I went in with some pinks, oranges, blues, and purples for this, and just applying a thin stripe of each color down onto the plate. Now the reason I like to use these Dina Wakley media paints is you'll see as I'm moving them down, they stay put. They're pretty nice and thick paints. They're not too runny. I find with some paints, they kind of run all over the place and don't hold their shape, whereas these are a little bit more of a heavy body paint, which is what I like about them. Now I'm going to take my Frostbite stencil, which is from Simon Hurley Create, and place this down onto my background here. Now for the stencils, I like to go through with a paper towel and lift off and add a little bit of texture there too. So I'll lift off any of the areas where that stencil is, and then add a little bit of texture below it where that stencil isn't. Then I'm going to lift that off, and where the area where the stencil is, it'll lift up a little bit of color. So I can spray down the stencil and collect a pattern from that one. And that gave me a little bit of a more watercolor look, which I really love the pattern of that one and can't wait to use that on a card later on. And then I'm going to also take another piece of cardstock and put it right into the gel press background that we created. Apply good pressure all the way around, and you'll get this super cool textured background that you can use on your cards. Whether you add just a sentiment or an image on top, this background is super stunning once it's done, and I love you can get a couple different backgrounds out of one printing. Now I also wanted to share, after I'm done with a layer of paint, I'll clean a little bit off my brayer by brayering it down onto an extra sheet of cardstock. This doesn't get rid of all the paint, but it creates a cool background and gets rid of any excess, and then the layer that's on your brayer just kind of dries, and I usually leave it on there and don't worry too much. Now I'm going to add a couple different colors on, kind of another sunset pattern, this time using a little bit more vibrant colors. And here I'm taking my brayer again, brayering down the color, and this is going to create a cool palette of colors that I can use on my cardstock. So instead of printing this one right away, I'm going to take some of this color that kind of creates that smooth color pattern on my brayer and use it to brayer across my card. You can go up and down, create kind of like a rainbow pattern if you want to and are using those colors, or just create a couple different sunsets. And then finally at the end, I added my cardstock down in there, and I ended up loving this background too, just that solid color. And I love all the other backgrounds to create cards with. Now I'm going to take out the circle gel press plate too. This one's one of my favorites to get a cool different look and add a little bit of white space on the edges. Using the circle plate just adds a little bit more interest to your card. So again, I'm peeling off the top piece of plastic, and on this one I'm going to add a couple different shades of green, just kind of some variation, emerald green and warmer greens on here. Then I'm going to brayer this all down and smooth out some of that color, and then we can do kind of a Christmas background. So I'm taking the Swirly Ferns background stamp from Hurley Create, and I'm going to press this down onto my stamp and kind of stamp it in. And again, when I'm using background stamps like this, I kind of move them side to side just a tiny bit to add that indentation in and lift off some of that paint a little bit more. So then I'll take it, flip it upside down, and since this one's smaller, I can kind of use it as a stamp, but I love these because they transfer a lot better than stamps do with a lot less pressure. So when you're using paint and things like that, it transfers the design super easily. Then I stamped down the excess, and I also brayered off any excess, and you'll see that come in handy in just a second. So to finish off one of the sunset cards, I'm taking the Snazzy Snowman stamp set from Hurley Create, and I'm going to stamp down and color in some of these images for the front of my card. So I'm just stamping down the snowman in jet black archival ink so that it doesn't move when we watercolor it. And then I'm also stamping down these little lights because you can string them in between his arms to add a little bit more detail. I'm going to grab some Hurley Create ink pads and smoosh them onto my craft sheet here, and then grab a little bit of water and start watercoloring my images in. I'm going to do this super quick, but for my snowmen, I like to add a little bit of gray to the white snow because it adds just a little bit of shading and depth and dimension to my image. Then I'll add his carrot nose and a little bit of shading to his mouth, and then add the string lights, which are just a bunch of different fun colors to it. Then last but not least, we can't forget about his little sticks in his arm, so I'll paint those brown with a little bit of gur, and then I'm going to go in and fussy cut this image out with a little bit of a border around it. Then here's a tip too. I like to go in with my clear acetate stamp sheet and kind of pick my sentiment that would fit best without pulling it off the sheet. Once I find it, then I pull it off and start my stamping. And here I'm stamping down the sentiment that says it's beginning to look a lot like Christmas in a little bit of clear embossing ink, and then I will heat emboss that with some white embossing powder so that it really stands out against my background here. So I'll sprinkle that on and heat emboss it. Then I'm going to grab my sweater weather stencil, and I'm going to go in here with a little bit of embossing ink on my mini ink blending tool. And here I just went around the sentiment and only stayed inside of the parts where there was the color, added some clear embossing ink on there, and then clear heat embossed it. This is just going to add a little bit of depth and dimension. Since we didn't add any texture on the gel plus there, we kind of kept that really nice and smooth and simple. I wanted to add a little bit of texture on top, and that's a great way to do so. I cut that down, added it onto some craft cardstock, and I love the way that that finished off. That background is so super cool, that little sunset there. Next, I'm going to go in with this Poinsettia Joy stamp set from Brutus Monroe and finish off the plaid card that we created. So I'm going to take this large image from here, I think it's holly berries, and I'm going to stamp this down in some jet black archival ink onto one of the green backgrounds that I created by just taking some of the excess paint and brayering it off. You'd be surprised how you can use some of these, and in this one I thought it was just a cool way to kind of color this in and get some texture behind the image. Then, since it's jet black archival ink, I'm going to clear heat emboss that really quickly to get a really shiny image onto it, and then I'll paint in the berries with that same red paint that I used for the background. I'm just quickly adding some color on top, and since it is acrylic paint, it's going to be nice and solid and sit on top of the image. Next, I'm going to take a piece of vellum and I'm going to stamp down the sentiment Merry Christmas on top. A really great tip is if you're using a gel press background that you made and it's a little bit too busy and you want to add a grounding point, add a little bit of vellum. I find that that really helps. So I'll heat emboss this Merry Christmas sentiment with a white embossing powder, and then I'm going to trim down the edges with the new Tim Holtz Deckle trimmer. I love this one to add a little bit of extra texture to the edges, and it creates kind of a cool grungy holiday look. I added down the leaf on top of my vellum with a little bit of foam tape, and then I'm going to add my adhesive all behind the leaf so it stays nice and hidden. I'll add that down onto the background, and again, cut this background down using the same Deckle edge. I just love the awesome texture that it looks and how easy it is to cut this edge down. Once I'm done with that, I'll mount it onto a card base, and there it's all finished. I love how this card turned out, and it kind of has a little bit of a vintage holiday look, which I am in love with. So I hope you guys liked these Christmas cards and this fun kind of card making tips video with the gel press and all these awesome backgrounds we created. Alright guys, I hope you really enjoyed that video. If you did, please give it a big thumbs up and leave a comment down below which of these two cards that we created in today's video are your favorites. All the links for every supply that I used in today's video are down below in the description box, and you can find tons more inspiration here on the Gel Press channel with all of these amazing talented designers. Alright guys, have a wonderful day. Bye!